Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Edwin, thank you for such a fantastic panel before, and this one is on the very interesting topic of philanthropy. Joining me today are Nicola Johnson, who has been leading Stewardship's major donor activities since 2010. As Chief Customer Officer, she currently oversees all philanthropy services and customer functions. We have George King, a Senior Wealth Manager at MASECO and Chair of Philanthropy. Vice Chair of Philanthropy Impact, and also very modest because he's not going to take credit. George is focused on leading the charge in the wealth management industry around incorporating philanthropy into the work of advisors. We have Joe Crome, who is Head of Business Development at the Charities Aid Foundation, or CAF for short. He leads the American Donor Fund, working with clients who are dual taxpayers in the US and UK to support them in their charitable giving. And finally, but not least, far away from me, we have Nepheli Rigas, who is a second-generation wealth inheritor who also manages her family office and is a founding member of the UN Refugee Agency for the UK's Advisory Board. Please give me a hand in welcoming them. So, research shows us that ultra-high net worths and high net worths are giving more than ever before, but the way this is happening is changing. So if we could hear from Joe and then from Nicola, how are you seeing this change?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. I think the first thing to say is that I think philanthropy is more relevant than ever to everyone in this room in the private wealth industry. So if anyone is skeptical about that, I hope that in 45 minutes we've kind of changed your mind about that, because there's a lot of growth and there's a lot going on. I think my answer I'll split into three quick areas, so market, structures, and appetite. So the market of philanthropy is growing hugely. Just to give you some numbers, we run a UK giving report every year at CAF. Last year, just under £14 billion was donated to charities in the UK, which is up £1 billion from the previous year. In America, just to give some context as well, it's about $500 billion a year donated to charity. So what we found is that, generally speaking, there are less people giving because of the cost of living issues that everyone's facing, but the high net worth individuals are giving more. So those who can give are giving more, which I think is good news and is down to some of the work that's happening with some of the people in this room. The second is structures. So, you know, if you look back maybe sort of 10, 20 years, if you're a high net worth individual and you want to give money strategically and you want to keep it in one place and find it easy, you would usually create your own charitable foundation and you would manage it that way with the help of your legal team and accountants and so on. I think in the last decade particularly, providers like CAF and Stewardship have really matured what we call a donor advised fund, which is a structure, it's a giving vehicle that sits under the infrastructure of us as a charity, but allows you to host all of your giving in one place, like a one-stop shop. So we take care of all the legal responsibility, the accounting, and all the due diligence and grant making to charities that the clients care about. I think that's matured a lot, and that is responsible for kind of a lower barrier to entry for clients. And then I think there's just increased appetite. So generally speaking, I think clients these days are more interested in working with others, in getting the help of experts. And so CAF, most of our referrals for new clients come from wealth managers, accountants, lawyers, and lots of the people that are in this room. And we, at the end of last year, we surveyed just over 200 advisors to ask them, you know, how important do you think philanthropy is? How important is it to your clients and your business? How equipped are you to talk about philanthropy to your clients when you talk about financial planning or other structures, estate planning? And what we found is that lots of advisors are not very confident. Some are, but there is a gap in the market for training and support. So 1 in 5 advisors had no idea how to talk to clients about philanthropy. 63% said they rarely or never bring up philanthropy in any context. Around 70% said they don't introduce philanthropy when they're doing fact-finding and onboarding a client. But we also know that philanthropy is more important to clients now. So we surveyed 500 high net worth individuals last year and found that over 2/3 said that being a philanthropist and giving money away is very important to them. The Ultra High Net Worth report last year found that philanthropy is the most popular kind of hobby or pastime, if you can call it that, for ultra high net worth individuals. So So we know that philanthropy is very important, and there is an appetite for support and extra training and conversation. So that's kind of where we're coming from with it.
Brilliant. Just to say, we will touch upon the role that wealth advisors and other private client professionals have to play a little bit later on. But Nicola?
Thank you. Is this on? Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks. The three things I'd like to draw out really are to do with changes in behaviours that we're seeing with our clients, with our philanthropists. The first one is really a change to how they're viewing philanthropy in respect of their overall wealth management. And I think we're seeing a much more of an intentional shift to view this as one whole picture. Whereas I think certainly in the past there have been some traditional models of philanthropy that have perhaps been a bit more siloed, a bit more segregated. There's a much bigger appetite now to view philanthropy as a very important part of the overall wealth management piece, and align that with the goals of the philanthropists and their families and their overall objectives. So I think that's the first shift that we're seeing. The second one is an appetite for greater impact measurement and to really understand what is our grant making doing, what is it achieving, again, is it aligning with the core goals that are important to us as a family, important to me as a philanthropist, and what is that doing, and that greater understanding of how those funds are being used and what difference that's making really brings a sort of a greater joy and a satisfaction in philanthropy, and I think that tends to be what we're seeing. People are seeking that greater joy in their philanthropy too. And I think the third thing, and quite an exciting one really for me, I think, is that we're noticing that donors are looking for greater collaboration and knowledge sharing. So they're looking at other families, they're looking at other foundations and saying, well, how have you done things in the past? How has that worked? What hasn't worked? Can we learn from you? Can we have a conversation with you? And there is so much value and so much richness in that knowledge sharing. So that's the model for the donors, but also I think that's a challenge to us in this room as well. Where there are lots of different types of advisors in the room, and we all come with different emphasis, different expertise. The one thing that we share in common is that we're trying to serve our clients in the best possible way. And so the challenge is, and we, as you mentioned, we'll come back to this later, but is there an opportunity for us as well to collaborate in a more effective way?
Well, that's the perfect time to bring in George, I think. So, George, I know this is something you've seen firsthand with your clients. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, what you're seeing?
Yeah, there are so many themes that have been raised here. I'm sure we'll come back to all of them at one point. But just picking up on one of your themes about the spectrum of the conversation and the less siloed nature of it, I think that's really an important one. So where it used to be that you might have a conversation just about someone's investments if you're a financial advisor, for example, and that would be, what's the risk and what's the return and what's the cash flows and what's the time horizon and so forth. Increasingly, those conversations are what's the purpose and what's the impact. And as soon as you start to have that kind of conversation where you are thinking about what are the values of the client and how are those aligned with the capital allocation, that suddenly opens up the entire spectrum of capital. So normal investing isn't really normal. It has an impact. Even if you don't know what it is or don't ask, it's still having an impact. And then adding intentionality to that increasingly as you sort of go across that spectrum, having intentionally more and more impact or more awareness, so that all the way out to philanthropy where that's all I'm trying to do is make sure I have impact, no financial return, just trying to drive some kind of outcomes. And so it quite naturally becomes an extended conversation when you start off saying, what's this wealth for? Mm-hmm. And who are you and what are your values? And if you start there, that broad spectrum of conversation happens quite naturally. And as Joe was saying, there's a huge gap. There's a gap between the need and desire for guidance and advice from clients across the wealth spectrum, not just ultra wealthy, but even with sort of more modest elements of wealth. And I think there are advisors in the room that cover that whole spectrum. All of those clients are looking for different types of advice and guidance and help. Often they won't turn to the advisors in this room because they don't think that they are a source of that information. So it's an opportunity to differentiate. It's an opportunity to actually serve clients. And there's an acute need, absolutely, for those conversations.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think it is that puts off advisors? What scares them so much?
So unfortunately, this list is fairly well documented, and I won't go on and on with it. But the first one, I think, is most advisors just don't think it's their job, right? So we're trained to talk about taxes, and we're trained to talk about inheritance, and we're trained to talk about cash flows and expenses and balance sheets and so forth. And there's nothing in the training for most advisors of any kind to talk about philanthropy or to talk about the values end of capital. Increasingly, and Ross brought this up in the first panel, increasingly customers are asking about sustainable investing. So that's starting, but it's not part of the basic current expectation of what it means to be a competent professional, to have this in your vocabulary, to have this as a tool set and a knowledge base. And it's a little bit silly. I remember early in my career, someone drew a circle and said, okay, this is a client's wealth. There's only 4 places it can go. They can spend it in some way in their lifetime. They can give it to people they know, either in their lifetime or at death or whatever. It's going to go to taxes. And the other thing is giving it to people they don't know, which is essentially charity. I mean, you can give it to me, I guess, but it's mostly charity. And so for 1/4 of the places money can go, to be completely off the table for a conversation for wealth advice just seems kind of absurd. So the first piece is people don't think it's their job. The second piece is, even when you become a bit more enlightened as an advisor, saying, wow, I know clients care about this and it kind of makes sense, I should help them with it, there's a sense of inadequacy around that. I don't understand the terms, I don't understand the landscape, I don't know what's out there, so why would I start to engage with clients on things that I'm kind of not capable of engaging? So there's a knowledge and skill gap that gets in the way as well. And I think the third piece is it can be misperceived as being against one's own interest, right? I'm here to sell you art. I'm here to advise. I'm here to get your money invested. I'm here to sell you insurance. I'm here to do something else. And if I divert that conversation, it's going to move money away from what I do. And we can have a longer conversation about that. But that misperception, I think, has also been a blocker.
Thank you so much for that. Nepheli, oh, sorry, do you have a microphone? Great. So it would be interesting to hear from your perspective how you began your personal journey into philanthropy with regards to your family wealth and how that's taken you to where you are now.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a second-generation entrepreneur and investor. My father founded an energy company, and since a very young age, I was always traveling with him, which exposed me to different countries around the world. And I saw the contrast firsthand from my very comfortable upbringing in a country like Greece and the hardship other people around the world were facing in less fortunate countries. So I always had this sensitivity since a young age. And it was when I was 16, I decided to spend a summer in Uganda volunteering at a local school. And the experience I had there, I think, transformed my journey towards philanthropy for the rest of my life. I made a promise to myself to never forget that experience and the people there. So I came back and I always was volunteering or donating to different causes, but as I'm sure you know, life gets in the way. I was in college, I was working as a full-time trader, and I didn't have necessarily the mental capacity to do more. But then I was fortunate enough about 2 years ago to transition into managing my family's wealth. And then going back again to what you were saying, I didn't have anyone to help me or any advisor to come approach me with the topic of philanthropy. And through a serendipitous meeting, I met a representative from the UN Refugee Agency, and we had a conversation around the work they were doing, and I was truly amazed about the impact they have. And I started educating myself more, and I very quickly realized that it's one of the biggest challenges of our time. There's over 114 million displaced people around the world at the moment, which is a number that has doubled in the last 2 years. And 114 million people, that's 10 times the population of my home country. So I couldn't just sit back. I had the opportunity to make a change. So I joined as a founding member of this advisory board to try and motivate others and myself to drive positive change.
Well, I mean, fantastic work. And Joe, is this sort of typical of the philanthropy you're seeing? To me, it seems unusual maybe that you came across a cause that you wanted to be involved in and to do it in such a personal and active way, but a lot of people don't take that approach. So how does CAF facilitate the gap between the giver and the recipient?
I think the first thing to just remember is that philanthropy is so personal to really everyone, and I think sometimes people are skeptical about philanthropy, but the clients I work with are really passionate about their causes. They've been touched by those causes, whether because of a health issue or a family friend or somewhere they've lived previously. So philanthropy is so personal. in the sort of structures that we offer, we work with clients, usually high net worth clients, and we're hosting everything for them under our expertise. And a lot of the clients come to us and they actually already know, they've lived all over the world, they have particular charities or causes they want to support, and they have a relationship with that charity. And so in that context, what we're doing is helping them with the due diligence and the payments and the investments and making sure the money can go as far as possible. But then there are also lots of clients who come to us and maybe they've had an exit from a business and there's a large amount of capital to distribute, or they've been working hard and they've been focusing on their career and they've been earning, but now suddenly it's time they can think about their philanthropy and their legacy, and their children are more involved. And they often don't know where to start. And I think often for us, inertia is the enemy, where they are worried about giving to the wrong cause, or they're not sure what sort of structure to use, or whatever it might be. And that we don't want that. We don't want hesitance stopping things from happening. So we have a team, at CAF as one example, we have a team in-house, which we call our Impact Accelerator, which is all about helping clients with either it could be that we start from the very beginning and the family wants a strategy, they want a giving plan, we'll do a theory of change, we'll look at what are they trying to achieve, what's their ultimate outcome, and work back from there. Is that by making grants to charities? Is that by making loans? Is it what does it look like? What's the time frame? Is it local giving? Is it global giving? All of that kind of stuff. But then we narrow down to the other scenario, which is that the client then understands, okay, I'd like to give to a cause in this country, so maybe they want to give to a conservation charity in Malaysia, but they don't know any. So then we'll go and do research, and we'll consult, and we'll look at their budget, and we'll go and make some recommendations about what would be the most impactful opportunities for them in that space. So, providers like us, and again, I think this goes back to the point about private wealth managers, and lots of the people in the room. It's not your job to know all of those things, but what you can always do is signpost clients. So there are people like CAF and Stewardship, obviously, but there are also independent philanthropy consultants, and there are people that can help your clients with this kind of stuff. So my challenge would be, as a bare minimum, we can all signpost to the right people, and there are always people to help your clients with those kind of questions. I think increasingly we all work with very international clients. Cross-border giving is a really, really big theme, and it's really complex. So my advice is to signpost to experts on that.
Please.
Just to jump on that for 1/2 second, do a little bit of promotion. So you mentioned Philanthropy Impact, which is a charity set up to accelerate charitable giving, more and better charitable giving in the UK, through the advisors to wealthy people. So it's not working directly with wealthy people, it's through everyone in the room who has some kind of advice role with wealthy people. And what Joe is just describing has been one of those blockers, where people, even if you want to signpost, you don't know who all those people are, you don't know who all those resources are. So yesterday, I think, Philanthropy Impact has just soft-launched a tool specifically for all of us to be able to do this. It's called 23 Impact. That's the whole point, is to create this facilitating tool so that those who are advising wealthy people can access somewhere to know where all these resources are. So keep an eye out for that. You'll hear more about that soon.
That's great, and also very timely. Thank you, George. Nicola, how do Stewardship's services, are they similar to what CAF offers, or how are you guys different?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously there are lots of similarities between us, and I think the due diligence piece, trying to work through and take away some of those burdens from donors, so that they can experience the important part and the joyful part of giving. We have in common. I think there are also some differences. Stewardship, I believe, are the only Christian donor advised fund in the UK, and whilst we serve donors of all faiths and none, we find that our Christian ethos does help to build trust in us as an organisation. And I just want to kind of re-emphasise as well the point that was made earlier about the importance of the personalisation of philanthropy, and it was mentioned on one of the other panels as well, about kind of building personal relationships with clients and how important that is, because that really is the only way to help people properly in some of these complex situations. One of the services that we've developed over the last few years is what we've called our Donor Advisory Board service. And it's a collaborative, tailor-made sort of approach to philanthropists, which basically enables them to put a structure, not a legal structure, but a structure around their philanthropy to bring in third parties, trusted third parties, so perhaps friends, family members, and it brings them into that grant-making sort of decision space. Mm-hmm. Because actually, not everybody realizes, but giving away money at significant levels can be really hard. And I think kind of enabling a structure where you can bring in other wisdom, sort of a collaborative mindset, and to really pick through some of those issues and really understand what are we trying to achieve, does this align with our strategy for philanthropy, has been really important for us. And as we've developed it, we've seen that that's been really impactful for donors, as well as the causes they're supporting. And I think, in fact, last year, for the donors that were using that Donor Advisory Board service, we saw an overall increase of 100% in their grant making. So, you know, it just really kind of leans into the fact that this kind of facilitated, supported space where we need to lean and learn from each other is really important. The other piece is, and I think probably similar to CAF, is that we work with the beneficiaries as well as the philanthropists, and that gives us a unique positioning in terms of understanding the causes that we're giving to in a bit more depth. So we really can align what the donors want to do with their money. We can really understand where that's happening and how it's happening and report back to them and do that bespoke research piece. So yeah, we're finding that that is becoming really effective. And I think the other piece, and again, probably not necessarily different to CAF, is that the team that we have around our philanthropists is supported by an in-house team of experts at Stewardship. So we have in-house lawyers, we have specialists in charity law and governance, and they're all there to, again, help support and facilitate and to ensure that things are done in the most tax-effective way possible and to work with donors' existing advisors too.
That's great, thank you. So, George, of course, we all know that the benefits of philanthropy, they're self-evident. Why wouldn't we all want to give as much as we can to the causes that matter? But to the hesitant advisors sitting among us, of which I'm sure there are none, because I'm sure everyone's itching to advise. But what would you say are the benefits from their point of view as advisors? What do they gain by facilitating this philanthropy?
Other than ultimate salvation or something like that?
Absolutely, other than feeling really good when they go and lie in bed at night.
I think that's a really important question. The most important first answer, of course, is you're actually serving the needs of your client, right? That's the driver, and I think that's come up, I think, in every panel. It's been this recurring theme, recurring message that regardless of exactly what we do in this sort of broader wealth supporting ecosystem, the first driver is how can we best support our clients and their needs and what they're trying to achieve. So the first best reason that you do this is because this is something your client needs and wants to do and you can facilitate, clearly. On a more selfish basis, because we're also commercial animals, this is mutually beneficial, right? So I can't tell you the number of meetings I've been in helping a wealth advisor in some sort of senior capacity talk to their client, and all the wealth advisor wants to talk about is how do I get more money? How do I get the money that's in that trust? How do I get this inheritance money, et cetera, and so forth? And that might be of some interest to the person across the table, but what their passion is this other thing. It's this school in Africa they're trying to build, et cetera. Your inability to engage with the client on the things that they actually are passionate about creates a distance as opposed to putting on the same side of the table and you're actually working on common goals and common outcomes. More importantly, I mean, this is maybe teaching the wrong audience, but especially in the wealth business, but I think in all of our businesses, if a customer or client loves that engagement with you, they come back. They come back for repeat business, or they stay with you longer, or they refer you business, or whatever, depending on your specific kind of business model. Time and affinity is what drives the value in our businesses in terms of how we are working with clients. If we aren't therefore working with them on the things they're most passionate about, we are in aggregate likely shortening the time that we're going to be dealing with them because someone else is going to come in and do that, or they're not going to come back for the next transaction, or they're not going to refer the next person because they had a perfectly fine relationship in that transaction, but not the same as if you were really actually helping them with the things they're passionate about. So on a self-interested basis, we all make more money working for clients that have a better engagement with us, and we're solving these core issues and problems and so forth for them. The idea in the wealth business in particular, there's a huge fear that they're going to take money away from me that I get fees on and go give it over there somewhere, and I get nothing for that. And so it's actively against my self-interest to encourage them to do any kind of philanthropy. That again is really short-sighted. So first of all, I will have broader conversations about someone's total wealth, about all their wealth, when I am able to talk about the piece that I won't directly manage. And frankly, look, if you're dealing with wealthy people, they're often going to be multi-banked and have multiple providers. To think that you can only talk about the piece that is under your care is incredibly short-sighted. And over time, as we've been hearing from both of our providers here, the ability to still stay engaged with that money that is going to philanthropy is increasingly there. So the DAF model has been fantastic in saying, look, let's set up a donor-advised fund for you. Let's put X millions into that, and I can still manage that for you because you're not giving all those X millions away. So we're going to move it from pocket A into pocket B. Because we're engaging, I know how to invest this piece for you, how to invest that piece for you. We can do some detailed cash flow modeling, some detailed scenario analysis about when to give, how to give, what that means for your lifestyle, et cetera, and so forth. That becomes an integrated part of the advice that we're giving.
Thank you for that. Staying on how philanthropy can be used to engage clients, one way that it's often spoken about is how important it is in engaging the next generation. I think along with sustainability, philanthropy is often brought up as one of these topics that the next generation is really engaged in. Is that something you've seen with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Ross also mentioned this earlier. I'm glad he brought that up then too. So, the first time I saw this acutely, I was sitting in a meeting with a patriarch who had made a bunch of money and a mid-20s-year-old daughter who was beginning to get involved with wealth. And the patriarch was still focused just on, net returns, maybe on cash flow, that was it. And the young adult, sort of 20-something adult daughter said, that's interesting, and then her concern was, but what are we doing with this, and what impact is it having? And can we achieve these positive goals, and are we involved in these negative things, and what have you? It feels like a truism, but with the increased activity of sort of newer groups of wealth holders, and in platitudes, women, younger people, et cetera, and so forth, it is absolutely the case that if you aren't leading these conversations, and even worse, if people aren't coming to you with them, I promise you they're having them elsewhere. So all that's going to happen is you are going to accelerate the transition of wealth away from you, your firm, your personal book of business, if you aren't leading the conversation and able to actually provide solutions. It's absolutely the case, yeah.
Nepheli, that sounded like it almost maybe could have been about the situation that you were in. The father focused on one thing and you having a different viewpoint on what you wanted to do with the wealth.
Yeah, definitely. And it's often the case that, for example, with my father, he was the one who created the wealth, and maybe he didn't have the time to engage with other issues. And then my generation comes in, we are younger, we have more time, I don't have a family yet. So you have more time to be able to dedicate to better causes, but we are quite a different generation from the ones above us. And mainly in terms of transparency, we live in a different world. We have social media, we have the internet, so in a second we can see a picture from across the world, so we can track everything, every action that we take, we can track it, we want to know where the money we're donating is going, and it is a big opportunity for organizations that are willing to be transparent, because they are going to get commitments from the younger generation. And then the other difference, I think, is we really want this more personal touch to everything we're doing. Our whole lives is on social media, so we are lacking this more personal engagement. So the moment we hear a more personal story or we see it with our own eyes, it can make all the difference in the world. In my case, with my work with the UNHCR, I've been hearing stories of refugees. I've been close with a girl who is living in London from Afghanistan, and it really changed my whole view and the way I was engaging with the organization.
Not to make you sort of the spokesperson for all next generation wealth inheritors, but thus is your role. What advice would you give to advisors who are faced with a multi-generational family? What would you say would help someone get engaged?
Yeah, I think it's come talk to us. We have the time, we have the energy we want. We're in a very empathetic generation. We want to do good. We engage with brands who are doing an impact, and come talk to us, get to know us, find out what really matters to us, where we're from, how we grew up, what is our background, and then any sort of engagement in that way will have a net positive result.
Thank you. And Nicola, Are you, I know we're circling back to the very beginning now about the shifts in the trends of philanthropy, but how are you seeing the transfer of wealth and the generational shift? How is that playing out in terms of the different approaches?
Yeah, I think just echoing some of what we've already heard here in terms of how that's being viewed, but also the boldness and the courage that is needed for generations, next gen, to come in and interrogate and understand some of the reasons behind some of that grant making or some of those practices. I think for us in the donor advised fund space, but also in the advisor space, to be really aware and understand the challenges that come with that for all of those generations in that picture, to say, well, actually, we're going to challenge how you've done this and potentially the motivation behind it, and potentially we're going to change it up. And I think, yeah, some of those conversations we're starting to see come through, and it's part of the privilege of getting to work closely with donors and understanding them and building that relationship, is that you then share in their journey. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that journey has been a painful one. I mean, we have a number of clients who have had experiences, for example, in this area, specifically relating to legacy arrangements, whereby conversations haven't been opened up in the early stages, and things have happened, and that's caused friction. And actually what that's done is it's harmed the philanthropy strategy kind of going forward. And so for the next generation to have that appetite to come in and say, no, we want to talk about this now, during our lifetime. We want to understand what the goals are. We want to understand what your intentions are for us when we take over, potentially, this philanthropy fund. I think that's something that I think is really key. And again, we talked at the beginning about this kind of integrated approach to wealth management and to looking at philanthropy as part of that, and the social impact investing piece, again, really important. And I think there are challenges there as well around finding enough of the right types of investment that help to actually fix some of those issues, rather than just relying on grant making purely, mm-hmm. but actually to have that integrated approach with the grant making and the investing. That is something that we're seeing that people are keen to start to address as well in this area.
And Joe, how about for you at CAF?
I think I'd probably come back to a point George made a minute ago about time. So the idea that if you can provide the broadest engagement with your clients, if you can show them, and this is sort of me talking to all of the wealth managers and accountants and so on in the room, if you can show them you care about their lives and their values and what matters to them in terms of impact, I think there's a much greater chance that you'll retain those clients, and that'll be a multi-generational family that you'll be managing. And I think we've probably all seen surveys year after year. There are surveys about what percentage of clients, when money passes down a generation, what percentage of children will retain you or any of their other advisors into their future. And all of the surveys we see show that between 80 and 90% of inheritors will change advisors. So they'll fire you and they'll find someone else that they think is more progressive or understands them more or more modern, whatever it might be. And that might just be a perception they have. But we also know that philanthropy is something that you can really embrace to help that sort of piece. In the survey I mentioned earlier on that we ran last year with high net worth individuals, the biggest segment that said they would value philanthropy support from their advisors was the 18 to 34-year-olds. So nearly 2/3 of them said that they would value that. And Fidelity in the US published a report last year that said that their young investors, which is 21 to 41, said that they'd be twice as likely to choose an advisor who can offer charitable planning and charitable giving advice. So I think there really is a piece there where I think clients are going to be expecting more from you. And again, I think, as I said, the minimum is signposting, but actually there's so much more than that. And also organisations like CAF can work with you to help train your team. George is involved through Philanthropy Impact, and we're involved with talking to the Treasury and the FCA and DCMS about greater training for, maybe in the financial planning space, where CPD and initial qualification should involve charitable planning and tax-efficient giving. So there's lots of kind of driving towards helping resource the industry to respond to what I think really is a need that's coming fast.
Please.
Just pick up on that conversation that Joe mentioned. So those conversations that are happening with the industry bodies and the regulators and Treasury and so forth, we've been talking a lot from a carrot perspective, why one should do this and how good it is. I just want to reemphasize that there's a potential stick here as well. Right, there was a discussion earlier about consumer duty. There's been changes around how you assess suitability, and really having to think about the values of clients in that conversation. The direction of travel is clear, that the bar is getting raised, and you can't ignore whole aspects of what your clients care about and still be a competent advisor. So exactly what form that takes and how fast that happens isn't clear, but the conversations Joe's referring to means that, you know, you can do this on a carrot basis because you should and your clients want it and you benefit and so forth, but there is a stick that's probably increasingly coming as well.
Well, that is a good pitch to end on, so everyone heard it here first. I have a couple more questions that I'd like to ask, but to make sure we have time in case anyone in the audience has a question they would like to ask, please raise your hand if so. Edwin. Oh, okay, sure.
So recently the Sunday Times...
Sorry, just wait for the microphone.
Recently, the Sunday Times giving list shows that ultra-high net worth giving in the UK was down year on year. And is this something that you think we should be concerned about, and what could be done to reverse that trend?
I think, do you mind if I quickly jump in? So we're involved with the giving list, and we sort of spoke about this with the media earlier in the week, and I think it's not a trend I'm concerned about. I think our reports show that high net worth giving is up, but I think also, so the giving list tracks the charitable giving of the cohort of the top 100 people on the rich list, and so, you know, you're talking about a total kind of giving cohort of about 3 billion. I think it's 3.3 billion. And I think the loss year on year was about 200 million. And when you're talking, I mean, these sound like huge figures, and they are, but when you're talking about that giving of that size, a 200 million drop-off could be one or two very large gifts for large capital projects or buildings or whatever. I don't think it's a trend of reduction. I think we're seeing the high net worth giving is increasing quite significantly. And also the giving list only tracks the public giving of those individuals, so giving they've made through their own foundations or structures. It doesn't track giving through donor advised funds. It doesn't cover giving that's made anonymously to charities. So I don't think it's a theme to be anxious about. I think we're seeing, as I said earlier, I think we're seeing those who can give more are giving more, which is good.
Just to pick up on your public-private point, are we coming to the end of, you know, libraries with family names on them, museum wings with family names on them? Are we shifting away from that towards more discreet philanthropy and giving, do you think?
I don't think we're necessarily coming away from seeing people sort of publicising some of their donations. I think naturally for CAF, you know, the work that we do, some clients will choose on certain gifts to be anonymous because it's quite private, it's a very personal cause, and on other gifts they might like their name to be known. And sometimes, I mean, what we encourage people to be public with their giving, because we know that the more that giving is talked about, it is infectious. Giving, when people talk to peers about their giving or they talk about it more publicly, it does encourage and motivate other people to give, and we see that in America much more than in the UK. So although sometimes I think it's badged as kind of vanity philanthropy, I think actually we know from lots of research that talking about giving is a good thing. It has a good outcome ultimately. So that's something that we encourage.
Is that something you've seen with your clients, George?
It definitely is. And just picking up on part of what Joe was saying there was some really interesting survey work done showing what people give to that do give and what they care about. And the gap between that is surprising. And a big part of that is because they're giving based on who happened to ask. They're giving based on what their friend is doing. They're not giving based on where their own motivations are, again, because of the lack of structure, guidance, process, et cetera, and so forth. So there's a lot at play here in terms of the context of giving, how it's happening. I mentioned the purpose of the charity is to have more and better giving, and that's part of it, that there's more alignment, and with more alignment, you probably will give more, et cetera.
Thank you. Any other questions? At the back.
Hello, Alec Marshall Spears. To what extent do you regard philanthropy as a kind of lifestyle choice for the super rich? You know, they have different aspects of their lives, and this becomes a key part, the way they define themselves and spend their time.
I'm happy to start with that, and I'm sure others will have a perspective. So that can be part of it, clearly, right? So being on a board or going to the galas or whatever and so forth, you know, name on the wall, clearly that can be part of it. As Joe was saying, I don't think that's true for all and probably not even for most. I'm not sure if there's a question underneath the question as if that's a good or bad thing, but when you're talking to a client, one of the questions is, what do you want your life to look like, right? We're making long-term planning decisions that's based on lifestyle, and then the financial implications around that in terms of what you need and what you're going to spend and so forth. And so, yeah, if part of that lifestyle is a lifestyle that includes the galas and so forth, then it's incorporated in that. But I don't think it's sort of automatically endemic, but it can be.
And Nicola?
I think for us, we see something a little bit different, and I think the majority of the clients that we serve tend to be Christian, and I think for them, the motivation behind their giving is different. I'm not suggesting better or worse, but it's different, and so for them, it's a heart decision. It's something that they feel needs to be part of their life and is a beneficial part of their life for them and their family, and so it's much less about, can I have my name on that library or that museum, but it's much more about, okay, how do I achieve what I feel I should be achieving with my philanthropy, with what I feel I have been given in my lifetime.
I actually have a client with you, and for them as Christians, they say, "Look, I have a 10% tithe. This is how my faith, is represented in how I live," and so it's very much driven on a faith-based giving with you.
Nepheli, would you say philanthropy is part of your identity and maybe within your network? Is that something you're seeing too?
Yes, it definitely is. And to your point, even if it does become a lifestyle, if the net result is positive, it almost doesn't matter. Some people like that, some others don't, and they do it from the bottom of their hearts. Some do it because they want to attend a gala. But if the end result is being a philanthropist, it doesn't matter.
And Joe, do you have anything to add?
Actually, no. I think we'll make everyone's covered it so well. If there are any other questions, I think we can take any of those.
Great.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, at the back there.
Hello, Imogen O'Rourke from SEC Newgate. I'm just wondering, the last time I looked, environmental and nature philanthropy was very low, around 6%. And yet we're in the midst, obviously, of a major nature and climate crisis. Can you throw any light on why this might be? Is it because the structure of giving has changed? And it's more a combination of philanthropy plus impact. Can you throw any light, please, experts? Thank you.
Experts.
I think it's really interesting because obviously very much we know about what's going on with climate and conservation, and the narrative very much is that young people focus more on those cause areas. We haven't seen in our data or in our UK Giving report that the needle moving yet on those causes. So as you say, they're not the top 5 cause areas in the UK do not include environment and conservation yet. I think there are lots of reasons we could speculate why, and I think George probably has an interesting perspective when it comes to people diversifying and impact investing and that kind of thing. But from our perspective, just to kind of confirm that we're not seeing giving changing that way materially yet.
Yeah, this is not exactly scientific, but I think there's a couple of things that are probably at play. So this is maybe a slightly educated guess, and it's come up a couple of times, right? A lot of what has driven people's philanthropy historically has been something that's connected to you. I went to this university, I go to this museum, people in my family have this disease. There's an immediacy that is driving a lot of that, whereas things like environment and science and change and so forth, it's less tangible, it's very long term, it's very hard to see impact, et cetera. So it's not a shock that you haven't seen that big shift yet, but as Joe says, it probably will accelerate as we have younger generations in control of more of that money. As an advisor, when you talk about sort of investing side of that spectrum, so the impact side of that spectrum, it's much easier to show the impact of, how many donkeys you've saved with this particular investment of the donkey sanctuary than, how you have, changed the rise in global temperature by making this investment. It's going to take 10 or 15 years to have any result, and even then it's blended by 30 other factors, so the ability to actually measure that impact is quite difficult. So those are probably some of the reasons, but I think Joe's right, that the needle will move, it just probably hasn't started to move as fast yet.
And Nicola?
Yeah, I'd agree with that, but I think the only other piece I'd add is that I think that brings it back around to the importance of that kind of facilitated space. As you mentioned earlier, George, people don't always realise that they're not necessarily giving the most amount of money to the causes that they think they're supporting. And so that piece around, okay, let's work with you, let's give you a reflection of what's actually happening, and perhaps sometimes challenge people to say, well, this is where your heart is, but this is where you're giving. those two things might not match. So how do we move from one place to another? So I think again it's coming back to that as we move with the next generation and the things that are important to them. How do we facilitate that? How do we step with them and say let's make the change together? I think that's a really important part of it.
Well, thank you very much. Sadly, that's all we have time for. So thank you everyone for taking part.